Welcome back to my channel. This is your man Chu-Chu, and today we have a very interesting. Uh, Basically, I have a very interesting story to tell. It's gonna be like a conversation. As you can see, the topic, that's my maternal grandmother, sitting in the middle of the road, and the title reads, the life decisions my grandmother had to make in the real world. And you see, this lady was born um, basically pre uh, westernization stronghold in Africa. Before, in the era of in the colonial era, before westernization took a very strong hold in Africa, this was the period when she was born. My mom was born in 1958, so minus 20 years. That puts my grandmother somewhere in the realm of 1930, thereabout. So I want to say 1938. So she, somewhere around there. So they usually get married very early. So 1958 to 1938 will make her 20 years old by the time she gave birth to my mother. So this was still the era when colonialism was coming to an end in African, like it was coming to a pseudo end. And most African countries were beginning to take possession of their independence. But don't get it twisted. This was still the colonial era. You understand? So the British were still running things, and so was the United States and other governments still meddling in the affairs of Africa. So during this period, the westernized standards of doing things has not hit Africa yet, at least not in the area which my grandmother was born into. And in this period when she was born, stuff like social media and things that we're used to was not available. Even in the United States here, people were still enjoying the record player. The TV was still coming into existence and stuff like that. I believe they were getting ready for World War II or something like that when she was born. So this was around that era. So the media propaganda was still at a lightweight level. It hadn't overtaken world it hasn't gone on a global scale like we see today. So this was some of the era she was born into. And then during that period, in addition to not in the absence of social media and stuff like TV news, letters, and stuff, like newspapers and mass media as we know it, was very they were very minute. The occurrence was very little in that period, right? So they didn't have access to stuff like that. And so because of that, the level of knowledge and the level at which they operated was very close to the primitive, era of things. So life was at its most basic level. So you look at stuff like industry, there was little to none, because even something as simple as agriculture, the level of processing was very little. So you farmed what you ate. So if you didn't farm, you didn't eat. And if you didn't have money and you didn't farm, you had to go to the local market to buy it. And if you didn't have money, you were going to starve. So basically, making an effort to be somebody in life or to gather your own or to survive was a real thing. And then you look at something like manufacturing. Something like manufacturing during her era when she was born, it was almost non-existent as well. The level of manufacturing was at its basic level, in which that just human manufacturing, as far as people just going to the farm and farming their goods and rearing a couple of animals, having a little herd of goats and cows and stuff like that, because then mass production wasn't at its peak, so people could only afford to do things on a very small scale. And then if you look at stuff like creative, today, even just like what I'm doing, you just can't up and just be creative, because after you create, you have to convince people that your creativity is worth something for them to buy into it. So you have to create, take it out there, and start winning hearts and souls before you can get accepted. And then you look at something like education, during the period she was born, depending on your skill set, you needed some real skill set to be considered an educated person right before westernization really took off in the area which my grandmother was born. So your skill set was looked upon as being able to do something as little as pottery. Pottery, being able to make those African calabash and pots and stuff like that. So if you didn't know how to do that, you would, you could not brag to have any specific skill set. And the people with the top skill set were the ones that were considered high level, high members of society. Just like today, a doctor will be considered, or a pharmacist or a lawyer, and people in that nature, because of the skill set they have. uh, Anywhere from low skill or zero skills required or very little skill level, to mid skill to very high skill level in the case of a plastic surgeon. These guys, the porters, the guys that were into wood carvings, the metalsmith, the guys that were into stuff like woodwork and weaponry, these people were known to be the people in society with the greatest level of skill set. So because they produced and made what people use there. Even people in the field of leather, like leather making. The guys that used animal skin to make clothing, make shoes, and stuff like that. They belong in this group too. That was the level of education that was attainable at that point, until the financial system or the central bank hit Africa. And then remember, even when it hit Africa, it had to spread down gradually, or the effect had to slowly be felt, all the way through the region, which is Biafra land, and down to where my grandma was born. So it wasn't very quick, because remember, this time there was no such thing as mass media was in its conception very little. There were things didn't catch fire as quickly. Unlike today, you could do something in Chicago and someone in as far as Afghanistan could get it within 30 seconds. So it wasn't like that back then. So it was a different, era she was born into. So based on this, she had to, when she was born, as she was growing, she had to make certain decisions. Something as medicine, you see, as a woman, you just didn't walk into a hospital and give birth. As a woman, you just didn't go anywhere and do anything. You just can't walk the street at night. You just can't do things like you would see today in Western society or in any society, because it's not always safe. Like the threat of violence and the threat of your safety and your lively life was always on the line. Okay. And because of that, women were very cautious and needed protection from their fathers. And because of that, you will see as we go down the list, you understand the importance of this. So, medicine was something that was more of cultural, it was culturally valued, and there's very respected members of society, like my paternal grandfather, were the ones that practiced the African version of medicine back in the day. So, they used stuff like herbs, they were herbalists, and they used different concoctions and different herbs to cure diseases that were just in natural occurrence, stuff such as fungal infection, viral infection, just infection from injuries, to treat diabetes, glaucoma, and other diseases that occur naturally in the human species. Before we started having more complex and advanced diseases, some of them by as the making of man, and some of them just was just because human beings started intermingling and traveling internationally, and races started mixing and stuff like that. So the next thing is banking. Banking was a very rare occurrence. By the time my grandmother was born, banking was basically something of some sort of a normal occurrence in Western society. But in the African society, banking was rare, because then they had a system of trading by barter, trade by barter they called it, and they were using the cowries back then. Okay, the cowries was like some sort of seashells, and there was only certain people that were privy to having access to the ocean to be able to obtain some of this stuff. So those were the really rich people. Then as banking, by the time she was born, banking was slowly creeping into the African society. So then, you cannot just easily meet a man that was bankable. Even some of these people mentioned earlier, the metalsmith, the guys that dealt with pottery, some of them had to make their pottery and trade it for something in exchange, like food, like materials to build their houses and so on and so forth. So because of this, the economy was almost non-existent. There wasn't there was an economy, but it wasn't very vibrant in the Western compared to the Western fashion. There was an African system of economy which she was born into, and this was the economy in which people thrive. It was in a case where a metalsmith decided to marry my grandmother, and he would come to the wedding presenting gifts made from his area of specialty. and in exchange he got a wife, and that was how he paid his bride price. Okay, so because of the economy wasn't so vibrant, there wasn't such high level of maintenance of society, if you get my point. Like the roads, there was nobody in charge of, creating roads and stuff like that. So people paved their own way and they tried to maintain it as much as they could. So there was no responsibility on anybody why anything was done or was not done, because the economy wasn't vibrant to the point that someone had to be held responsible. And that leads me to my next point. When she was born, because of there was no government, that's why they couldn't hold anybody accountable for the level of maintenance that had to be done in the society. And because of that absence of proper government, or government that is proper in the eyes of the Western standard, there was no form of law. There was order, right? There were people that was in charge of the legal system, but these were community leaders that basically administered justice and held people responsible for their ill actions. They were the ones that determined if the social deviants needed to serve time, banished, or sold as slaves, or whatever the situation might be, or just be outcasted. Because then they had people called outcasts. So this was the period in which my grandmother was born. And based on all this, she was making very serious life decisions in the real world. Another thing was housing. Like over here right now in the United States, if you were a woman and you're not married, you could get housing, and you could easily buy a house or do so many things, or get housing assistance, get food stamps and stuff like that. In this place, part of the world, even till today, if you don't have it, you just don't have it. Nobody's coming to your aid. There's no help coming. You're on your own. If you don't have a house, you're just not gonna get it if you don't have the money to build one. If you don't have food, you're gonna starve to death in case unless your neighbor or somebody is really looking out for you. And because of that, there's no food assistance. So people have to do all kinds of menial jobs, and sometimes violate their own dignity just to feed. And because of that, most women required, as you would see, I will talk about as we proceed, required men. They depended on men. They depended on not just any man, but they depended on strong men to be able to provide housing and to provide this assistance. And because of that, the relationship between men and women were very codependent. Not just because of this period, but since the beginning of time, the relationship has been codependent because even despite the fact that women need housing and they need assistance with food or anything or protection, they need men for the procreation of children. To be able to bring a child into this world, you need a man. You cannot do it any other way. So basically, science will argue that in the case of childbirth, the baby belongs to the man because the woman provides the egg, but without the man, the eggs cannot be fertilized. So that's why you could take one man and 100 women, and within 24 hours, he could impregnate all of them. But you could take one woman and 100 men, and after once she's pregnant, it's gonna take another 9 months before another baby comes in. So you see, back then these people understood it and they moved accordingly. Another thing was security. There was very minimal security. Unlike today, where we have like supreme intelligence from the FBI and CIA, back then the security and intelligence was very very non-existent. So when a crime happened, it relied heavily on word of mouth and the good faith of the people and good intentions of citizens to be able to apprehend the culprit. But that was then. So, because of this scenario where you know that there was no security, or security was at a very, very minimal level, and intelligence was almost non existent, right? It was based on a word to mouth, word of mouth kind of scenario. You knew not to move through society as though you were safe. You had to move as though there was an element of danger always presented your way, just like an antelope would move when it's in the you know in the Kalahari or one of these resorts, when it's in the wild, because he knew there was always a threat of violence. There could be an animal, a lioness, a lion lurking somewhere. So it always was attentive and cautious and basically aware of this natural threat. Okay, the next thing was when she was born, food and healthcare were not standardized yet, right? So when you went to the farm, right? I'll give you an example. When my grandmother was born, Okay, she was born in a home to a family man, and based on all the activities of all the midwives and all the sister wives, she was brought into this world safely, right? And the food, that was healthcare at its finest. The midwife activity was able to bring my grandmother into this world safely, okay? And because of that activity, right? The food that was fed to her after she came into this world was as a byproduct of the activity of my great grandfather, if that makes any sense. So, my grandmother's father, the activities he put down on the farm was what led to her being able to feed after she came into this world. Without that, her chances of survival were slim to none. So food then was only provided to you or available to you based on your actions. So if you don't work, you don't eat in the real sense. And another thing that happened during that period, some of the life decisions she was making as she was growing up in her lifetime, there was no lifestyle, entertainment, music, tourism kind of situation like we have now. The lifestyle then was just your family, right? There were African arts, there were dances, which actually goes back to education. These were some of the skills that Africans had. Remember, we're talking about the African civilization, right? There's nothing wrong with the African civilization, but this was in the advent when pre-Westernization stronghold and colonial era. So at this point, Westernization was creeping into Africa to basically overtake everything else and make people fully abandon the African civilization for what it was. So at that point, lifestyle was basically the African clothing. You had the leathersmith, the people that made the shoes, the people that made the clothes, the people that made the metalsmith, some of the goldsmith, people that make the jewelries. Like you look at a country like Ghana, they had their rich gold culture and stuff like that. And the same thing was occurrent where I was from. I'm from southern eastern Nigeria. So back then, people like my grandpa, I believe they had occasions where they went to exhibit their lifestyle, where they put on their best garments, the African garments, they put on the African made shoes, they dressed properly, they put on the African made jewelry, they had their body designs and their marks, tribal marks and stuff like that, and the style in which they wore their hair. So all these things was their lifestyle. And they wore this lifestyle to entertainment events, right? So where they went to plays or they went for storytelling or they went for a wedding, they went to visit relatives or they went to some good faith activity, such as a uh, uh, music event where people were playing music or masquerade festival where they had to go get entertained. These were their form of lifestyle, entertainment, and music, and most of these things attracted some form of tourism from neighboring villages. So they saw as tourism was existent in the form of neighboring members of neighboring villages basically crossing their borders into the village in which my grandmother was born to experience their type of music, their type of entertainment, and their lifestyle. So that was how tourism existed until outsiders started coming in the form of Europeans. They never experienced anything other than that. So it was little villages, and they were basically importing, interacting, and exporting with people right next door to them. So it wasn't on a global scale where they were dealing with seaports and international trades and stuff like that. Yes, Africans were traveling way before the beginning of time, but at this point, the level of commerce was not as global as it is today. Arguably, some academicians have shown that Africans were actually dealing on tourism and global trading trading on a global level before the Europeans did it. They have proof of ships and sculptures and stuff like that show that Africans were already has already globalized the world way before. But at this point, in my grandma's situation, in the place they live, they could only afford to trade with people next door. So that goes to my next point, which is import and export. So import and export was existent, but it was not on a global level. It was just with people next door, with people not too far away, maybe a couple of miles up the river or something like that, a couple of miles into out of the village, but it wasn't anything ridiculous, right? So these were some of the things that were going on in that period, and so this was some of the things that she had to keep in mind, understanding that import and export was present in her community in this fashion. And then the next thing she had to deal with was basically she had to understand that when she was born, and she was raised as a little girl. Let me talk about my grandma's life a little bit. She was born into a family where her father catered for her because African men are usually present in their children's lives. She was loved, she was cared for in the tune that she had her mother, and then she had multiple mothers as in the form of stepmothers that loved her and took care of her, and in the absence of her mother, catered for her and made sure that she was fed and she experienced love and she had people to play with and know that she was cared for in as little form as that occurred in the African fashion. She was able to extrapolate that from her current situation. Okay, so her father hunted and gathered and farmed and made sure that the family was well fed until the day came where she grew up to the point that in those cultures they taught her from birth how to speak the language, how to communicate, and she learned basic chores around the house, or like for example how to cook, how to cater to newborn children, how to basically um, pacify them and put them to sleep, how to do basic house chores, clean up, do dishes, clean things around the house, keep basically general maintenance on a small scale, how to just keep the family environment very conducive for human cohabitation. So she learned some of these skills, and she learned some wife skills, or a lot of wife skills from her mother because she was surrounded by her mother and other wives. So wife skills was something that was rampantly passed on to the women. And then for the men, they were always expected. It's not just an expectation. You need or needed to be strong in order to be able to go on, to be able to marry one, existing monogamy or polygamy, whichever you decided to choose down the road. But it was a requirement to be a strong man in order to be able to carry on your legacy. If you were weak back then, so your chances of survival was very low. And my grandma was privy to this. So she understood that she needed to marry a very strong man, a man that was strong enough to be able to bring her into his family, take care of her, give her children, and basically uh, have her unite with him and carry on his legacy into the next generation. So my grandma basically went on. Back then, the educational system, or the Western education system, has not yet crept or gotten a stronghold on the African community, community yet in the whole of the southwestern Nigeria. So because of that, my grandmother and her siblings, they mostly got basic level education. They learned the alphabet, they learn how to deal with numbers. They learn basic etiquette, how to behave in society, how to be good mannered citizens, and that was enough. So from that point, she went from her family straight to her husband's house. So then there was no dating. Over here in the United States, this was the period of the advent of dating, where people dated before they got married. In Africa, that was a no-no. You go straight from your home, your parents' home, you go straight into your husband's house. There was no room for dating because the families got together, they had a conversation, try to figure out the terms, and try to understand the utility that the man got, right? The man had to get some form of utility out of the man had to get some form of utility out of the situation. Okay, so the man has understood, had to understand the wife that he's taking in, the utility that she brings into the family, and the man makes known his utility as well, what he's able to provide her with, and what the value is that he brings into at the forefront of the marriage proposal. And at which point he pays the bride price and he takes the woman as a wife. So in this case, my grandpa showed up, married my grandmother as his third wife, and brought her in, and then had my first aunt, my second aunt, my mother, her younger sisters, her younger sister, her younger brother, and then the youngest sister. So about six children, just from my grandmother. And I believe my grandpa in total had over 20 children. And yes, And that was the situation back then. So my grandmother was able to move straight from her father's house straight into her husband's house with no hitch, no dating, no no kind of combativeness or being disagreeable, and none of that modern day attributes. She was a very feminine woman, a woman that was ready to go into her husband's house and make life easier for the husband, which is exactly what she did. So, in this time, one of the things that people like my grandmother really understood was that old age was a death sentence alone and single. You see, now today, women could basically afford to go single because most of them are very submissive to the government in Western countries, and the government basically assures most of these women that they will be taken care of. But you see, in a place like Africa, even till today, a woman cannot retire on the government. Government does not offer her any assistance, food provision, or health care benefit, or any kind of housing. So that lifestyle, going into old age, not attached to any kind of family or not attached to any kind of unit or community, basically was a direct death sentence because for sure you were gonna basically, take a dirt nap way before time because if any sickness came your way or anything happened, nobody would know what happened to you because you don't have an immediate family to cater to you. But you see, in that polygamous setting, there was that family camaraderie where everybody knew what was going on with everybody. In the morning, once everybody woke up, everybody checked up on everybody. But when you didn't have that, when you were alone, let's say in the case of my grandma, let's say she stayed at her grandfather's house, because remember, eventually my great grandfather had to, passed away because these people got older and moved on in life. And my grandmother was going to get older. So she stayed in her grandfather's house, let's say out of stubbornness or out of the sheer unwillingness to work with a man. Eventually, a day will come where she's the only one in the compound, right? Because most of her sisters will make alternate life choices. They will go and get married and build their own communities. And she will be stuck in a community less lifestyle where she has nobody, so she could go visit her sisters and visit all these people, but she cannot stay with them because there's only so much accommodation that these people could afford to provide for the people that are with them. So at that point, the frustration kicks in, depression kicks in, and so many other things that are associated with human beings that are ostracized indirectly or involuntarily from society because they never bothered to build their own community, their own family, and their own future to carry on their legacy. So these were some of the disadvantages of and still it was disadvantage my grandma spotted then and made a decision about it to not fall for that trap. But today women can afford to do that, and just people in general could afford to do that because the consequences are little to none because the government steps in and saves the day in most cases. And not only that, um, so the world has become globalized and civilized in such a way that even at old age, people can still figure out a way if they're basically divisive enough to get their life back on track. Okay, and then the next thing is my grandmother understood that this was just the order of the day. Polygamy was the order of the day, just like today. Monogamy is the order of the day because it's just a westernized standard to use to basically grow the economy and to basically it's just a system, it's just a system that's adopted to basically benefit the financial condition of the Western society. It's not something that is natural to man. As a matter of fact, is against the nature of a man to be with one woman. The natural instinct and the natural order of any male creature is to be polygamous. And nature has showed us that in any creature you look at, animal, lions, bears, hyenas, any creature, wolves, anywhere you look, and amongst all the mammals, they are all polygamous, right? So my grandma understood that polygamy meant group economics. Okay, so people in the polygamous marriage or in a polygamous family, they practice group economics where everybody pool their resources together for a greater good. And because of that, my grandma understood that coming from a polygamous family herself, she understood that group economics was the order of the day, and group economics was something that was going to save, that was going to ensure that she's able to carry the legacy of her husband into the next generation. So she was very open to that, and she understood the decisions that her father made on her behalf and the ones that she accepted and decided that to carry on in good faith and go on to make it happen, right? So retirement. was something that was non-existent because the government wasn't so organized to the point where they had enough resources to retire people. So your government was basically your immediate family, and then pronouncement or judgment was made by a community of leaders. So when you were thinking of retirement, you had to think family and children. People built their family, they built their children, they built the life that they wanted in order to retire on it. So women went ahead to pick a strong man, or based on the advice of their father, picked a very strong man or a good leader to lead them so that they could have kids that he could make strong, and at the end of the day, those kids would go on to become very strong men and provide and cater to their mother. That was the order of the day. That was the form of retirement. So women married men as first, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, whatever, and the nth wife. And at the end of the day, the man that they married to, they trust his judgment, and they had kids for him. And then those kids grew up to become strong men just like their father in most cases. And then they went on to provide not just for their own family, but for their mother in some sense, while their father was getting old. And as they reach old age, they all pulled their resources together because they were a polygamous family to take care of the old. Okay, and that was the form of retirement that my grandmother experienced. And even my grandmother at her old age, um, marriage was some of the benefit, was some of the things that benefited her because of the way she married and the way people married around her and the way her kids married. She was able to retire in this fashion as well. So in this time in Africa, marriage equals strong community. So if you were not involved in marriage, you most definitely did not have a very strong community. So, like I see today in Western society, a lot of people talk about community and they don't talk about family. And I think it's impossible to have a community without a family because a community involves units that could that could bring citizens to life. Basically, you have to be able to bring, reproduce, and have people that would grow up to become productive citizens of society, and in the process of them growing, those group of people are called a community. So you cannot have a bunch of non-reproductive people or asexual relationships and call that a community. It's impossible because in a community people have to be able to carry on the legacy of their community. And in asexual community, once everybody in that community dies because of their inability to reproduce, that community dies eventually. So it's not a real community, it's a pseudo community because it's just a matter of time and the community is non-existent anymore. So marriage, in the eyes of my grandmother, which is one of the reasons and the factors that played into her making the kind of decision she made, she understood that marriage equals a strong community. And then at the end of the day, my grandmother happened to be such a resilient woman. She was alive almost to the age of 100 and something. So her prayers was always that my grandmother was gonna be able to get a man from a very good family. And then my dad came along, and my dad was able to save my maternal heritage because my dad, as his finances grew, he extended his hands of help to my great grandmother, from my maternal side, my grandmother, and to my mother as well. So everybody from the lineage of my mother benefited from the graciousness of my dad. He was able to take care of my great grandmother. He was able to come in and take care of my grandmother, and do things that were very benevolent that benefited everybody in the family. So my dad was basically a savior, and that's some of the things that you saw these women do. That was a reality that my grandmother was in tune with, that she understood that through marriage and how my mother married, she was able to be retired based on that reality. So they did not take it for granted. So marriage was almost a must. It was something that you had to do. Okay, so yeah, and then at the end of the day, my dad did that honor and made sure that my great grandmother, was buried with dignity. My grandmother was buried with dignity, and these were some of the realities that these women back in those days in the colonial era, okay, in the 1930s, were able to foresee, and they made decisions based on that to make sure that they had a meaningful life. So from being birthed into this world, growing up as a young girl, learning all these maternal skills and house skills and wife skills on how to take care of a family, to basically being married off into her own family, where she started bearing children and catering to her family and building a community of responsible citizens to be able to go into the world and continue that legacy like my mother did. And she went on to have me and have married a man in the caliber of my dad, who went on to pass down resources, to extend help to every member of the family and pull them up and help the people that needed to be helped. And such is my mission in life, to go on myself, to have kids that will come back, not just help and keep helping everybody, and working towards giving birth to their own kids and continue the legacy of family. So these are some of the life decisions that my grandmother had to deal with, that she had to make in Western Africa to be able to carry on the legacy of life. And because of her today, you see me here. Because of the smart decisions she made, I'm in front of this camera talking to you. So to every great grandmother, to every grandmother that made the decision to be agreeable, to be workable with a man, polygamous or monogamous, I salute you today. And I want to thank you guys once again for for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, dislike, leave a comment in the comment section. And if you need your car moved anywhere from any state to any state, feel free to contact me on Instagram or leave a comment in the comment section so I can follow up with you. And you also need to buy a car from any auction nationwide, IAA Mannheim, Copart. Give me a shout out. DM me on Instagram at ChukwumaijemNwosu, or leave a comment in the comment section and let me follow up, or message me on any of my social media platforms. Okay. Once again, guys, thanks for watching this video, and I hope the sound came out awesome, because I had done a video prior to this, but for some reason the sound did not come out good. So I hope this one came out. This one came out awesome. Because eventually I had to redo the video. I had posted the video and the sound was off. And by the way, the lady you see on the thumbnail, she is not my immediate grandmother that I just talked about. She is my step grandmother, right? She was my grandfather's second wife, I believe, right? But I could not find the exact picture of my grandmother, which I would find. And any day I find it, I'm going to update the thumbnail, right? So, contrary to what you've heard and what people make people believe in Western society, polygamy is a beautiful thing if done right, and if the leader of the family has the right kind of mindset, right? In some cases, you encounter people with the right mindset, but times have changed, and sometimes you encounter people with the right time, but the mindset is wrong. So it just varies. Just like monogamous marriages are not perfect, polygamous families marriages are not perfect by any sense. You just have to make it work. It takes the willingness of multiple individuals to get it to all go well. Once again, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you on the next video, okay? Bye.